All right, so this is my update slash I don't know build diary transition video. This is the second one, I guess, for Sanctum League. The first one I did when I was 95, and I was Explosive Arrow, and I transitioned into EA Ignite. So same type of build, Ignite to Ignite. Same Elementalist. Didn't swap any of my things out. Just the gems are different, and the gear is basically the same. The tree is different, but the gear is basically the same. Just like a minor things. Instead of using a bow and quiver and a rare amulet, I use Obliteration, a shield, and a Gloom Fang. That's the main difference. And basically, it's Ethereal Knives, which is EK, and it is a little bit worse single target because of my gear. You could have way better gear, like I have in Power 3. You can have it 4. You could use the Skin of the Lords. I don't have that. That's the right colors. Not for an effort of trying. I've gone through a bunch, but just none of the right colors. But long story short, you're using Ethereal Knives to deal physical damage, which you're converting into cold, and then into fire, and into chaos, in a variety of ways into chaos. Through Obliteration, through Gloom Fang as non-chaos into chaos. This gives us Chaos Leech, Chain Prod Speed, conversion from Gloves, plus conversion from Tree. Gives us our Fizz conversion. If you had a Watcher's Eye for Fizz from Hatred, you would use it. I don't. I have a little bit of a damage from this one I hear. The concept of how much damage is, well, 75 becomes 70, the 5k tooltip. It's like a minimal amount for that flat, because most of our damage is converted and looped in circles for context. So that's where our damage comes from. And we have things like the Red Nightmare I use for a little bit more damage, but also just Endurance, Charge, and Kill. The tree is mostly Fizz, Fire. Fire Dot is how it all comes together. Ultimately, because we're playing Shaper of Flames, my hits always ignite, and all damage can ignite, including any type of hit damage, which is most of my damage. I have Double Curse, Flam, and Ellie Weakness. Similar to how EA has, I have Arcanist Brand, Hydrosphere for double damage and single target, Flammability and Flame Surge, pretty standard for any of the Ignite builds. Ellie Weakness additional Curse because it gives me, well, more damage from my hit, more damage from the dot. But also I'm using Balance of Terror, which is one of the new jewels from Sanctum. This one gives me a chunk of random elemental if I've cast Ellie Weak in the past 10 seconds. So when I single target cast on something, I gain a big chunk of damage and I hit something. And then, of course, because Obliteration explodes for, yada yada. But the gear is like I'm Suppression capped. I have Respite on for Ignite Prolifs, and I'm not running Ignite Proliferation. I've got Awaken Swift Affliction, Awaken Unbound Ailments, and Power, Cruelty, which you could, if you had Awaken Burning Damage, you could put that in instead. You could actually run a Burning Damage just straight up. It doesn't really matter too much. And then Cold to Fire for the damage conversioning, and EK. You can technically run, for your gloves, if you didn't have the Watcher's Eye, you could run Herm Sorrows. However, you'll lose the exposure on hit, which I don't think there's any other way to get exposure on hit on this build, aside from that, really. So that's a little bit of a bummer. But yeah. So I'm res capped. Let me just show you what it looks like for mapping. I've been focusing on Breach, Harbinger, Abyss at the moment. I'll pay to put on more Harb. You have a free one, might as well. And I'm going to be transitioning this build because I'm, part of my transitions for this league is staying on Witch, basically. Forbidden Right's the end game goal, but now we've had to add more mid-link goals. So the next thing I'm swapping into is I have a 6-link Covenant, Uniting Dream, and all the bells and whistles for that for Poison SRS, which is a Necromancer. So I'm going to go from Elementalist to this build to a Necromancer eventually. And after that, I'll go to Impending Doom, which is another build altogether. This is like every week I'm changing builds. I'll probably gain a level or two. I'm 97 right now. Maybe I'll get to 99 or even close to 100. Hopefully by then we'll start doing our Mage Blood farm, I guess in Crimson Temples. And then just have our Mage Blood so we can eventually, 9 years later, transition to Forbidden Right. And I hope that by the time I have that done, I have my, not only my Mage Blood, but also my Awakened COC. But the build is pretty simple. I right-click, I EK things, it prolifts, chains, explosions. All of those things can cause more ignites. You shouldn't have to hit more than once per pack. Really, the whole pack should go away, as you can tell. I have MTX on for Herald of Ash. You'll see the explosions propagate as such. Has very far range, and you don't really miss the EA Jewel or need the Helm enchant for circular EA because of the fact that you have explosions, because of the fact you have chain and prod speed. So that's not a big deal. Not like a big thing you've missed really. But yeah, the build feels good. Feels fine. You have the mastery that says you recover life on igniting new enemies, which just means for packs I have a lowish life pool, but I'm actually fairly tanky. I have good survivability because we have lots of layered defenses, ailment immunity, suppression, etc. There's versions you could do with bows. I don't think it makes much sense. If you were in Trade League, I wouldn't bother with the bow setup really. I would just focus on getting your gem levels as high as possible. Yeah, the things I would recommend before starting this build, really all you need is Fuck, I've been mispronouncing this thing all fucking week. Gloomfang and Obliteration. You could start there. I would very much recommend getting Respite. If you don't have Respite, what I would recommend in Trade League as the Searing Exarch Suffix, you could have, when it's the top exceptional version, Ignite Prolif at 20, which is the same value that, this is hidden value, but the Prolif value is 20. That's the range. So without the top tier one, at least at 18, 19, or 20, it's going to feel little wonky. But I would recommend one of those. Yeah, aside from that, the build is pretty straightforward. I walk around tapping right-click and then things just bleed out. My main complaints for the build, Proc Shield is problematic. A little annoying. Aside from Proc Shield, what else is there? It's physically slow. If you don't have a Mage Blood or you're not shield charging, it's physically slow. That being said, like things like Breach like this is where it really kind of excels, because you'll just shoot a direction and things will die. It's got, again, tremendous reach and tremendous clear because of the explosions and the prolifs, which lends itself to breaches. So if you're trying to focus on breach content, Harbinger content, that sort of stuff, it performs quite well. I wanted to farm out breaches in a huge way because I was looking for Skin of the Lords. So for me, it makes the most sense and lets me just kind of effortlessly do breaches. Now, if you were in Trade League or you wanted to put through the effort, getting the circular helmet for the EA, the Ring of Blades thing to make your EA go to circle, yeah, I can understand that a bit more for breach specifically, because it's omnidirectional, but I don't think it really makes a noticeable difference. And you can actually run an extra aura. If you didn't have that and you had Charisma Anointed, plus you had a Determination enchant in your helmet, you could fit in any aura. So currently I'm running my Vitality on Arrogance. I could definitely do that off of Arrogance if I had Charisma Anointed, which I have nothing Anointed, or a Helm enchant. Currently just running Herald of Purity, Enlightened, Determination, Hatred. Again, my Enlightened's 3, it could be 4, and Herald of Ash as well. So things aren't perfect per se here, but they're not too far off of pretty good. And with the right minor adjustments and setups, I think you'd be off to the races. This does feel like, comparatively to EA did on like the last update video, which was more geared towards starting. I don't think this is geared as much towards starting in solo self-found. But I think it has a way higher ceiling for potential clear and damage. You just really would want something like a Mage Blood for this build because of just how slow walking you are is the big problem. I hate walking slow. Like, yes, you could get things to make it faster, but I don't think there's a whole lot that's making you a ton faster. You could get an Onslaught on Hit Ring, a Synthesis Ring. You could do that sort of stuff, but I would honestly run Polaric Devastation and Respite probably until I had a much better secondary ring. The single target's real wonky, which I could show you in a little bit here when we get to... Jesus Christ, Mortar. Just died to Mortars. That's with Suppression Cap, too. The, again, explosions can ignite things, right? So you have this scenario that happens quite often for when I was doing, like, Chula Breach Lord farming. And, like, he'll take no damage, no damage, no damage. And then I'll pop a mob that procs Ignite on him. And then he'll die in half a second. Like, even on, like, a pure Chula Stone. So... without having secondary targets, that's a little bit wonky. But Yeah, the Hydrosphere helps tremendously with that damage. Ooh, we got a depth. Is it a boss? Hey, it's a boss. Well, you can see exactly what I'm talking about then. I should pop my portal, just for context, right outside, because Cast on Death does not work for this. There's the dot damage. You could see, like, when it goes on, when something dies next to a rare, it kind of really drops drastically. But the pops are like, I mean, the audio shuts off. That's how you know the pops are extra good. When you're when you lose all audio, that's the sign of real DPS. Wow, here's the spookier one. So you can see the dot damage. This is an 87 zone, obviously, but the dot damage is actually okay. It's not the end of the world. It really just more comes down to some fights a little awkward. Like, it's not going to be great, and there's about, let's say, 3 to 4 gem levels on the table for damage. I could easily triple my damage right now if you had better gear. But it's fine for doing this. This is like higher tier content. So it's not the end of the world. Just awkward. You have to get this Hydrosphere hit, like, just correct to get that dot on. But once you do, you do. It's not the end. Again, it's fine. Perfectly acceptable damage. Alright, and... nope. Brashola. Pop, pop, pop. Definitely a very satisfying mapping build, though. I think there's tons of room to do this in Trade League. I would really recommend this. Like, Explosive Arrow in Trade League is totally fine to start with. We did the first video. And either builds, the Poison SRS or the Impending Doom, the ones I'll transition into, are also totally fine. This one feels like a Trade League build you really want to pump numbers into, though. Like, you could throw some fucking fat money at this and it'll be insane. It is insane for Breach, though. I would recommend, if you're planning on doing Breach farming, that's a part of your strategy for League. Would recommend Breach farming on this build. Yeah, getting Obliteration's easy also. You just farm the cards out. It's a very common card drop. Gloomfang's a little bit more annoying. You just kind of have to get one somehow. Kind of more like, wouldn't recommend farming out a Gloomfang, and I would just play Path. If you get a Gloomfang, it's like, oh, I could do, you know, EK Ignite now if I wanted to. That's like something that's on the menu, kind of. So, yeah, ultimately that's kind of where this build sits, is if you happen to have these 3 unique pieces in SSF and you want to transition into like a really comfy mapper that has explosions and has a lot of room for growth, would recommend EK Ignite. If you're in Trade League, yeah, just buy it all. Aside from that, probably would recommend sticking to a more traditional dot build, like, you know, whatever, Armageddon Brand or EA or DD or even Death Wish, and then farming out what would be your maybe next build, like the one I'm going next being Poison SRS or something like Impending Doom, because I think those have much higher ceilings. But this build has a 2.5 item prerequisite. Just would not play it without at least Gloomfang and Obliteration. But if you got them, go for it. It's a very 1.5 transition build, which is currently what I'm using it as. I had no problem getting, you know, to 97 comfortably. That death was my first death in, like, while mapping in like a good chunk of time, so not quite often to die. It's pretty decently tanky, and Elvor is just such a good item. I would recommend it for many builds. But yeah, next time you see this little build diary, whatever the fuck, I'll be playing Poison SRS, and then we'll be transitioning into Impending Doom. And if you're curious what you require for Poison SRS, well, as far as my standards go, you could do it sooner. But for me, it's the Covenant, Darkness Enthroned, United in Dream, 2/8 passive larges, and 6 ID4 Ghastlies. Those are the main things. I'm also using a +2 helmet, an Ashes, a Divergent Withering Touch, and I want the alt quality melee splash, but I can't seem to fucking hit it, so might end up just using Awakened Melee Splash or Multi-Strike. Unsure. But that's my benchmark. So I'm going to craft my jewels up and swap to this. And next time you see me, I'll be swapping from this to something else.